this work I'm going to present to you has to be seen as a part of the food sequence I would like to show you, the most relevant one in order to feed animals, male pigs, either entire or castrated. You all know that we're going to look at the amino acid, essentially. When amino acids are given surplus, you don't get any positive feedback, if I may say, for the animal, because his requirements are covered and the composition of the weight gain remains unchanged. But if there is a surplus, this leads to economic loss or loss of earning and waste of resources. Similarly, when below requirements, you don't have any bricks to build the whole world, and you downgrade the protein and you modify the quantity of energy which is in the muscle, and the consumption index goes down. So you want to make sure that the contribution or the intake, food intake, is optimum. So they have you give enough proteins, but without any negative consequences on the environment or on any other field. In order to establish the best food intake, you have to make sure that you know what the animal's requirements are. So this is an assessment of requirements on amino acids, the lysine, digestible lysine in gram per megajoule net energy. You see the change of the requirement over time. It goes down. It's not a constant, but this is an estimation of the requirements of castrated male pigs. The lower consumption index is such that what the curves I'm showing you were shown some time ago, that's back in 2010. What about the impact of the patient selection for leaner animals had or may have had on nutriment requirements of these animals? And this is what I'd like to identify with the impact of these changes. How do we assess amino acids requirements? Which is our topic. We use this Porc software to calibrate a profile of changes index and consumption over time. You see the parameters, and on that basis, you can model the requirements of animals. In order to do that, we collect information, data on animals fed ad lib. We weigh them at regular intervals during the fattening period to see what the mean weight is during that stage. At the same time, we monitor the consumption of feed in order to be, we know how many kilograms of each type of feed is distributed. And of course, you know the nutritional values, net energy, and net digestible amino acids content. So these data were collected on the entire castrated male, but 6 pens for each gender, born from Bloodland and Piétrain race. We followed them up between 26 and 118 kilograms. They were fed on the basis of a 2-step strategy, with the lysine content are on the slide. So the data collected on pens, on animals directly, were used to establish a comparison between castrated male and entire male. Then we did a calibration of growth and consumption profile and requirements in amino acids. So these data are presented this year. I call them 2023, and during the presentation, we'll be able to compare these with the data shown in 2010 with a few. The rate range was about the same, but it was a 1-step approach back then. No anticipation of a decrease in the feed intake to switch to another system. So first of all, the growth performances.
Eh bien, vous voyez qu'en 2023,
well, in 2023, fed ad lib, the GMQ is not different or significantly different between entire or castrated male. It was already the case 10 years ago. I think this is a key message I want to give you. Ad lib feed, there's no difference in terms of a growth rate. While the other criteria is heavily influenced by castration, non-castration. The intake quantity and consumption index is very different. We see here a sharp improvement of performances on castrated male during the control period. The difference of the index is twice as low as it was 10 years ago, and this is consistent with a carcass measurement. The differences in fat thickness, the differences are much smaller compared with 10 years ago, and this is, of course, very significant, and it has an impact on the estimation of weight gain. Now, let's look at the growth profile. Left graph, the changes of mean weight with age. Once the growth profile is calibrated, you can simulate the dynamic speed of the growth, and you see that the maximum growth rate is not reached at the same point according to the race. And castrated male can be more precocious than the entire one, which start fattening very well. The velocity was about the same as an average. In terms of a criteria, modeling criteria, what impact does it have? Well, the precocity model, which means that there's difference in value, and castrated male, which are earlier, have measureless value, which are higher than the other one compared. If you compare this with what we got in 2010, you see there are differences in the hierarchy of values is such that where you see the kinetics on the graph, entire males seem to be less precocious than they were in 2010. Look at the difference of G and Q. We find this, the G and Q is lower. It was exactly the opposite back in 2010.
La courbe de croissance avec la courbe d'ingéré, on obtient
the ADG, average daily gain. So what about the requirements in amino acids? You see the right graph is somewhat different from what we had in 2010, with a less difference or discrepancy between the requirements at the beginning of the growing stage, something to do with the fact that they are precocious animals. Our animals are less precocious than were in 2010 entire males, while castrated male is the opposite. They are more precocious than the entire ones. So this is what the requirements are closer together. My conclusion that this study confirms that the difference between entire male and castrated male doesn't have an impact on the growth speed, similar for the two types of males, then the fact that entire males are not earlier in 2023 compared with 2010 means that the requirements in amino acids is lower than 12 years ago. If you look at the recommendations made on the basis of the data acquired in 2010 and where they are nowadays, one sees that indeed there is the need requirements are in amino acids is not as high in entire males as it was 12 years ago. Now look at comparison between the Thai castrated males. They are more precocious, which increases amino acid requirements at the beginning. Nowadays, we have a very close, similar requirements between the two types of males. In general, we see a more significant progress in the same time interval. They're still very good in 20. So the difference in the requirements of the two groups is much closer. We're closing the gap, in other words. Conclusion is that we need to update the characterization of profiles in terms of growth profile. It's not something which is carved in stone forever. It depends on genetics, it depends on the type of gut breeding, it depends on sanitary conditions. You have to monitor a few sentinel pens in order to characterize the potential of animals, which helps you decide on the type of policy or management. So you do two-phase feeding pattern. If you want to have a multi-phase pattern, you need to anticipate that not all pigs are similar. So you have applied 10% safety margin or 15 safety margin to the values I'm giving you today. Thank you for your attention.